All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Waikit Lau. I'm the founder and CEO of Remote HQ. And today we have Sergey Gorbunov, who is the co-founder and CEO of Axelar, joining us for this segment. Sergey, please introduce yourself and Axelar.
Hey, Waikit. Hey, everyone. Great to be here. So I'm Sergey. My background in distributed systems, network cryptography, and many of the other related things. I went to grad school at MIT, where I studied formal cryptography for a while. And by the end of it, I got into the blockchain space. This is when I started to collaborate with Sylvia McCallie and some of the other folks on the Algorand project back in the days. And then since then, really got hooked up into the space, worked on various projects, helped to build out and launch the Algorand platform with my co-founder, Yorgos. And after launching it, we saw a new problem in the space that we realized is going to be more important as the ecosystem evolves, especially around interoperability. And that's what we've been focusing on with Axelar over the last year and a bit.
Excellent. And by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention congratulations on the $25 million round led by Polychain recently. With that, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about the state of blockchain interoperability, where things are today, and how does Axelar fit into the future?
Yeah, so I think one of the trends that we're continuing to see in the space is that the space continues to fragment with more and more chains being created, right? So today we live in a world where exciting applications are launching on different platforms, but unfortunately there is no good way to transfer assets or communicate across these platforms, right? So as a developer, you have a choice to make. Do you go and build on one of the platforms that's potentially like Ethereum that's already developed and has kind of some liquidity, but potentially sacrifice on some of the technical aspects, like your user will have to pay large transaction fees, wait for slow confirmations, and so on and so forth. Or do you go and build on top of these newer and potentially technically faster platforms, but then miss out on the networking effects, liquidity, and composability, right? And so this is really the problem that we're facing today as an industry, is that the space continues to fragment. There is lots of different assets and applications are spread across the ecosystem, but no really good interoperability protocol that's available. And so this is what Axelar is trying to solve at the very core. Is we're building an infrastructure stack and a decentralized network that allows to connect users' assets and the networks together through a unified and coherent way across the ecosystems.
So that's great. And if you were to put it in terms of, what I think everyone understands the evolution of the internet over the last, 20, 30 years, how would you characterize Axelar in those terms? I mean, are there analogies that we can draw from as we kind of look at interoperability in the blockchain space as we have seen evolution of the internet over the last 20, 30 years?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think we are still very early in the development of the ecosystem, right? We're about 15 years in the making. And I think if you draw parallels to the internet, then about 15 years in the making, we saw a very similar picture as we see in the blockchain space today, right? There were lots of different networks that were created by ISPs that provided good local connectivity to the users and applications, right? But then many players and many new protocols came after that really connected different networks and allowed for more efficient transfer of information from one network to another, right? So companies like Akamai did similar things, and then protocols such as BGP, HTTP, FTP, they're all built on top to really allow kind of uniform transfer of information across different stacks. And so I think we're in a similar transition period in the blockchain space today, where I think the next generation, next evolution of protocols that will be built will really enable us to, both on the routing and delivery layer as well as the application layer, to compose across different ecosystems. And so I think the next 5+ years are going to be incredibly exciting, that as we're going to see this change in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so when I talk to folks in the industry about interoperability within the blockchain space, I think a very common response I hear is, well, wait a minute, doesn't Polkadot, doesn't Ren, doesn't Cosmos, don't they solve interoperability? How would you kind of characterize that delta between what you guys are doing and, so what people think are existing solutions today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line, you have to ask yourself a question, right? If you own an asset on one of the platforms, can you use it in applications that are built on other platforms today, right? And I think the simple answer is no, right? If you own an asset like a Bitcoin and you see a new, exciting application on, like Solana or, Binance Smart Chain or some of the other platforms, you can't use it easily, right? And so the existing solutions so far have really fallen into one of two categories primarily. One, there are projects like Cosmos and Polkadot that really understood the need for interoperability early in the days. And the way they approached it is by building protocols that work very well within their own ecosystems to allow to transfer informations and assets, right? So you can, for instance, in Cosmos, you can spin up a Tendermint-based chain, and you will be able to connect it to other Tendermint-based chains and transfer assets and information through this protocol that they developed called IBC. And similar in the Polkadot ecosystem. But to bridge to other ecosystems that speak very different consensus rules or have different software stacks, we actually need new technologies. And so as a result, we started to see quite a few centralized, I think, solutions being built into the market over the last few years. And these centralized solutions are mostly acting as kind of custodians of assets that allow to lock assets on one chain and potentially allow you to mint some equivalent representation on another chain. And of course, the centralized solutions that are out there are incredibly dangerous for the ecosystem. I think it's one of the biggest risks that we have right now is if we want to bridge a couple of decentralized platforms, but we have the centralized sort of custodian in the middle, then you put in all the risks and regulatory and technical and safety risks on those players. And so there also have been a few kind of decentralized approaches that have been tried in the space. So TBTC, I think, one example, but it had certain limitations, still didn't allow to scale for arbitrary stacks of platforms. And so this is where really we kind of designed the Axelar network and the protocol is to enable what we call as like plug and play connectivity. So meaning that able to plug in an arbitrary chain with as little effort as possible, while at the same time making sure this protocol remains as decentralized, as robust, and as reliable as possible in the process, and doesn't add any friction for the ecosystems. There is no support that's required. They can continue maintaining their platforms, being able to upgrade it, and this is really something it's not available today anywhere in the market.
That's interesting. As you describe your solution set and sort of the differentiation, it reminds me a lot of, I'm a big fan of analogies, right? Mine reminds me a lot of internet, the advent of Akamai, the advent of Twilio, where you can just write to a standard set of APIs, right? And it's able to, in the case of Twilio, if I want to, if I have a mobile app, I want to send messages to my customers, and it doesn't matter where my customers are. They could be in India, they could be in different ISPs. Twilio essentially abstracts all the complexity, and all I really need to do is just to call a set of APIs to send that message. Does that kind of reflect, is that an accurate analogy?
Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate, right? If you think about how developers are building in the on the internet today, is that they're relying on a standard set of APIs and standard set of protocols, right, to build really solutions that are kind of network agnostic, right? So while you and I are kind of communicating right now over the video, the information flows through dozens of networks along the way, many hubs, and there are many conversions that are happening at the back end. But developers don't necessarily need to understand those when they build on unified and standard protocols. And users certainly don't need to understand those things, and they don't care so much, right? Like as a users, we want to be able to just directly interact with any application or any asset that we own without having to understand like how the underlying like infrastructure is built, what are the networks that resides on, like how do you flow from one network and how do you go from one network to another, and so on and so forth. And so I really think that like over the next few years, we're going to be shifting the kind of conversation in the ecosystem a little bit, right? And shift the focus to talk a little bit less about different networks and bridging technologies and get us to a position where we can start talking about interesting assets and applications. And that's what we really need to get to in order to reach the next level of adoption for the ecosystem, which I think is quite important.
So this is great. This actually segues nicely into my next question, which is, what are some of the compelling use cases and applications that Axelar would be able to enable that can't be done today just because of certain existing limitations?
Yeah, so I think the the basic use case that everybody wants to see today in the market, and that's where we're getting a lot of kind of excitement around, is to be able to move your assets across different platforms and use them in different applications, right? So if I own an asset, I should be able to use it in any application that I want, regardless to what platform it was built, which is not really the case today. And so that's what we are trying to enable with Axelar Network and the stack. I think the other kind of important concept that I think will be gaining more and more attention as we continue building this cross-chain world is a concept of asset locality, right? So if you think about the internet today, information is often cached on different servers that allows us to more efficiently access it from applications, right? And so similarly, as we enter in the world where like DeFi applications will live on different blockchain ecosystems, as a user, you might want to be able to access the application as quickly as possible, right? With very little latency and so forth and so forth. And so I think concepts like asset locality, where asset can be kind of cached across different ecosystems so that a user can, even if they don't own it directly on one of these platforms, can go and use an application with very little latency, with very little delay, while at the back end, certain processing like market makers are settling the transactions and making sure it's going to settle across the chains. It's something, again, that's not possible today, but I think we're going to see more and more of these as we continue building these cross-chain protocols, so that, again, get us to a world where users get to interact with any application, any asset that they own across the ecosystems.
That's fascinating. That also kind of brings me to, as you were describing your technology, my mind started racing also in terms of the other set of use cases, sort of near and dear to, I think, a lot of people's heart within DeFi, which is, today you sort of have the early stages of DeFi where, the yields of different pools are different, right? You have to manually move things around. They're not really connected, right, in a sense. If I overlay the Axelar solution and everyone is kind of plugged into this Axelar fabric, as an end user of someone who is an LP, a liquidity provider, it opens up the possibility just in terms of how I can move my liquidity around as well, much more easily, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. And not just move it easily, but also move it in a uniform way, right? If you need to move it from platform A to B and C, like, we don't want you to have to understand, 3 different stacks and 3 different protocols and the 5 different, security assumptions you have to make along the way, which is really kind of the case today. And so, to put it out there, we're still very early, right? And we're still, I think for an average user, the bar of entry right now is very, very high. And I think we have to really kind of change that momentum a little bit with building like better protocols for developers that can enable, transit with better solutions for the users.
Got it. So with that, tell us a little bit about the status of the development. What have been some of the integrations that you guys have done and the like?
Yeah, so we've been working on the protocol a little over a year now, and since then gained quite a lot of momentum. So as you mentioned that we recently raised another round of financing with participation of Polychain, like Dragonfly, Galaxy, North Island, and a bunch of other folks in the round. And so the the current status is we have a test network that we've been inviting selected participants to play with. The test network has been live for a little over a few months, and we're working with quite a few networks to date. So we're working with Bridging Bitcoin, Ethereum networks, various Cosmos-based chains, as well as various EVM-compatible chains like Moonbeam with the Polkadot ecosystem, Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, and a bunch of others that are in the pipeline. And so the goal is to really help us accelerate the go-to-market and scale some of these integrations over the coming months and iterate through a series of test networks and really prepare for a successful network launch after the network is robust and stable. And so that's what we're focusing on right now. And one of the other things we're focusing on right now is really building an ecosystem around the Axelar network, right? So to launch any decentralized protocol, you have to have a series of participants in the ecosystem, and such as like validators, wallet providers, various dashboards, monitoring tools, and to be honest, I think the stack is incredibly interesting technically, and so I think we're finding more and more folks are attracted to kind of work with us and help us build this cross-chain ecosystem.
That's great. And it sounds to me that your current partners that you guys are talking to tend to be the L1s and the L2s. For the audience, those audience out there, who may be in dApps, how should they think about Axelar in relation to their dApps?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So at the end of the day, our goal is to empower developers to make the best choices for their applications, right? As a developer today, like we talked earlier, your choices are pretty constrained and pretty limited. And so what we want to do is to allow developers to really choose the best platform for their needs and optimize for their specific use case, right? So whether or not they optimize for instant finality or decentralization, or they like the tooling of a particular platform or some of the other applications. And so we want to empower developers to go and build on any platform that they like, but while still being able to leverage cross-chain composability and liquidity. And that's where kind of the Axelar protocol and the Axelar applications can help them, so that users can move their assets to interact with their applications, and they can execute kind of calls to be routed across different chains and potentially invoking contracts that are not residing on the same chain as you built your application. And so that would really put the developers in the position to go and optimize for their specific use case, right? And pick the right platforms for them while still being able to benefit from the rest of the ecosystem.
Got it. No, very interesting. And obviously, speaking of audience, if the audience out there who is intrigued by the project and is interested in getting involved, what are the ways, what are the options for them to get involved?
Yeah, so lots of ways to get involved. At the end of the day, we're building a decentralized protocol and a decentralized stack so that anybody can participate. Currently, we have various materials that we have posted through our website or blog, so you can start reading through those and get familiar with the project and the technology behind it. We also have a live test network, like I mentioned, and there's a sign-up form available through our websites where folks can sign up and get in the queue to participate in the testnet. And we continue onboarding folks on a regular basis to get more and more of them involved and kind of learn how to play with the stack. The other ways to get involved is to really contribute to the ecosystem of tools built around the Axelar network, right? So you can build various cross-chain asset transfer applications. You can build various wallet integrations. You can build monitoring tools, dashboards, and so on and so forth. And so we have various programs that we're working through with the Axelar Foundation to really spin up some of those initiatives and accelerate them as we're preparing for the launch of the network.
Got it. Very cool. And as a corollary, excuse me, with the $25 million fundraise that you guys just did, where do you see the funds being applied? Is this growing the team engineering wise, or other areas that you would like to invest in?
Yeah, it's a combination of really engineering resources that would allow us to take on more integrations with different software stacks and kind of scale the technology and go to market a little bit quicker. And so we'll be hiring across different engineering roles around kind of a front end, DevOps, back end, cryptography, and the full stack. But also, I think a large part of this funds will really be used to really build an ecosystem around the Axelar network, right? So we need to have various partnerships around the business development, around some of these integrations that I talked about earlier, and around community building. I think one of the challenges that we're facing in the ecosystem overall is just an educational aspect, right? There are those that understand, the depths and the weeds of the technology, the protocols, the opportunities at the same time. And then there's, all the retail users and a lot of other folks that are not potentially, coming either from different backgrounds or they just getting familiar with the space a little bit later. And so I think there's a lot we can do to educate the community better around the new solutions that are coming to life, about the new opportunities, either through building the decentralized applications or getting involved in these ecosystems early on. Because definitely, it's an exciting space and it evolves very, very fast. And so we do hope to spend, a significant amount of our time over the next year creating more educational materials, working with our community, trying to, answer as many questions as we can and to help more folks get involved with, Axelar Network, but also in general with the different platforms and different layer ones, layer twos, and DeFi applications.
That's exciting. Again, reminds me of, you've got local area networks that are sort of islands right now, and you guys are enabling the wide area network, right? Essentially the internet. Yep. And the BGP routing. So speaking of the future, one of, I think, what everyone has been reading in the last few months is potentially more regulatory frameworks being put in place, and certainly in the U.S., sort of the expectations over the next months or years, I think similar to a lot of other countries. And there's been work and talk at the FATF layer, which is international organization of all the different countries' treasuries. I think as more and more regulation is around KYC and AML and less of the non-AML peer-to-peer transfer, does that affect Axelar in any way, depending on where the regulation goes, or are you guys agnostic to those?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So by design, Axelar Network is a decentralized infrastructure, right? So it's just like any other kind of layer one blockchain platform that's out there. You have a validator set, and various folks are delegating potentially to the validators to vote and kind of secure the network and run in the protocol. So Axelar Network is designed the same way. So there is no single party. There is no single entity that will control this protocol, and we're trying to decentralize it as much as possible. And from that perspective, it's sort of a community good, right? Like there is nothing that we as a company control in the network overall. I think the regulations are potentially will bring some shift into the ecosystem, and I think one of the dangers that we talked about earlier is around some of these more centralized bridging technologies, right? Because at the end of the day, centralized bridging technologies are custody providers that are controlled by an entity, and so if regulations kind of come into the play, you have to then you're going to be in a very different position to protect the assets and have to satisfy various regulatory rules around that. And so we have to be you have to watch out for this. But kind of regulations aside, I think another just a very exciting sort of asset class that continues being developed in the ecosystem are like central bank digital currencies, right? Which will come, I think, at some point, and they're just as important to interoperate for those as for all the other assets, right? If I have a financial institutions and I want to have a regulated stable coin or stable currency, if I build it on any platform or customize a platform, I go to one of the permissionless or open platforms, we still need protocols to interoperate with other potential central bank digital currencies, other platforms, other open assets out there. And so I think, again, for those things, we need a neutral and decentralized protocol, right? Because if various foreign entities want to exchange their assets, well, then who is going to be responsible for this exchange? We're going to set up a third party kind of foreign entity in the middle. That's not gonna happen, right? So we need a decentralized kind of approach towards that. And so I do think kind of Axelar network will be quite uniquely positioned to address some of those use cases as we see the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We've only touched upon the private, tokens and stable coins, haven't touched on CBDCs, which, at some point, if they're mature enough and it's real, they need to talk to, between CBDCs, right, for remittances and things like that. So with that, I think we have got less than a minute left. I guess I have one last question, Sergey, for you. Any predictions for the next 12 months in the crypto market?
The crypto
Bitcoin
market.
to 100,000?
Don't think I'll speculate. We'll go up, we'll go down, but I think we're going to continue building, and I think it's going to be fun.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Waikit. It was great having you.